I recently got one of my dream cameras, the Sony RX1. This is a 35mm fixed lens, full frame compact camera. I'm here to give you my first impressions and my opinion on whether or not you should get this camera. The first thing I love about this camera is the image quality. The 24MP full frame CMOS sensor coupled with the 35mm f2 Carl Zeiss lens delivers razor sharp images. I have a Sony A7R3 which is a 42MP full frame camera, and I have a 35mm f2.8 Carl Zeiss lens that I use with it. On paper, they should have similar results, right? Similar size lens, same focal length, and same size sensor. So I was a bit hesitant to get this camera because how much better can this camera be? It would take a lot to blow me away with the sharpness or the image quality, but upon seeing the results for the first time, I was really blown away. Although it is not a night and day difference between my A7R3 size lens and this size lens, I could tell that it is sharper and has a bit more character to it. It is just special. I could totally see what the fuss was about when the users were really praising the image quality and the sharpness of this lens. It is a 12-year-old camera, but I really think it produces the best image quality I've seen on any camera that I have used. I love the color rendition as well. It just has some magic to it. I love this lens and I can't stop raving about it. The next thing I love about this camera is the compact size and its build. I knew this was a compact camera before I got it, but you really have to see it in person to see how small this thing is. It is just so easy to sling it on and carry around. I love the design as well with the small body and relatively huge lens. It looks like a freak of nature. But because of this lens, this camera is definitely not pocketable. But it really is tiny and I just love the full frame in this tiny body. I don't know how they did it, and I also don't know why not more camera companies are doing this, including Sony because they discontinued this a long time ago. This is a perfect size for street or travel photography. The form factor is a definite plus and the build quality is really nice. I love the physical tactile dials and the aperture ring. Next thing I love about this camera is the excellent dynamic range. Unlike with some other smaller sensor cameras or other compact cameras, I really don't need to worry too much about nailing the exposure perfectly. I just point and shoot in RAW and the images will be perfectly retrievable whether it is slightly under or overexposed. This gets me less worried about my settings while I shoot. I only worry about my composition. This especially helps at night knowing most of the highlights and shadows will be retrievable once you're in the ballpark. Next is the manual controls and dials. The first thing I noticed when I was setting up this camera is the dials I can set up for specific needs. Sure, most cameras can do this, but this camera has a lot of dials and buttons so I can assign it to my needs. Focus mode, ISO settings, and 3 customizable settings that can be saved and retrieved by the turn of the dials. I have custom 1 set to my daytime settings and custom 2 set to my nighttime settings. Other small things I like about this camera is the smaller file sizes. Only 25MB for RAW files. The Sony A7R3 has 80MB file sizes if you shoot at uncompressed RAW. Even if you shoot in compressed RAW, it's something like 43MB. So this was a pleasant surprise. And it has silent shutter. The RX1 has leaf shutter which makes it nearly silent. Perfect for street photography or any environment where discretion is key. I love to shoot photos in museums. It's actually a pretty good place to shoot. So this camera will be perfect for those situations. Lastly, the cult following keeps the market value high even after you buy and use it. So you can sell it off for the same price as you bought it after enjoying it for a couple of years. Now, let's get into some things that I'm not so crazy about, and there are some things that I hate about it. Hate is a strong word, but I feel strong about some of the points. The first thing I absolutely hate about this camera is the poor battery life. I mean, take a look at this thing. This is the battery for a full-frame camera. What would an RX1 review be without a complaint about the battery life? This is by far the most common beef that RX1 owners have against this camera. Sadly, it goes for the RX1R Mark II as well. Battery life is extremely short. For a person who shoots a lot of photos, I rarely complain about the battery life. I often get around mid-300 shots for almost any camera that I own. And that is more than 2 hours of heavy shooting. After that, I get tired and need a break anyways, so I rarely need that second battery. I'm done for the day. But this is different. You only get around 45 to 60 minutes. I need about 30 minutes to warm up when I'm out shooting photos. So after I warm up, I get 15 to 30 minutes of real shooting. That is really pathetic. So a second battery is a definite must. But upon using it daily, I think a fourth battery might be needed for a peace of mind. That is equal to having 2 batteries for other cameras. When you're in the market for these cameras, you will often see that the previous owner had as many as 4 extra batteries, and I don't blame them. Mine came with just 1 extra battery, so my photo walks were cut short from time to time. The battery alone could turn you off about this camera. It is certainly having that effect on me. I dream about getting the Mark II, but it has the same battery, so that makes me a bit hesitant. I heard about the warning about the battery life, and it really is that horrible. But on the positive side, the battery is really small, so it is not really difficult to carry extra batteries around. So it is alright, I guess. Oh, and what's even worse is that the charger that it comes with charges really slowly. So it is quick to drain but slow to charge up. Next thing I don't love is that it is not weather sealed. It is a camera that you can carry all the time because it is so small, but it is not fit for all weather conditions. Since it is harder to replace this camera or fix this camera if something goes wrong, I see myself babying it a bit more, so I haven't shot it in rainy weather. The Ricoh GR3X did show some glitches when I used it in heavy rain, so I don't want to put this camera through that. I don't know how much this will matter to you, but some people, including myself, like to shoot in the rain, so it is a shame not being able to use this camera in that particular situation. Next is autofocus. The autofocus system is slow. Of course, this is a 12-year-old camera, so I understand how it can't be as quick as recent cameras. But it is what it is. I'm not trying to compare it, I'm just saying that it is slow. It can struggle in low light conditions or with fast-moving subjects. And it can struggle in broad daylight from time to time if the situation gets a little tricky. Next is no built-in viewfinder. Unlike many high-end cameras, the RX1 lacks an EVF. There's an optional external EVF, but that adds to the cost in bulk. Composing shots on the LCD screen may be challenging in bright sunlight. I honestly don't use the viewfinder all that often, so I am okay without one, but just for your information, this one does not have a built-in viewfinder. Next is high price point. The RX1 is expensive, particularly for a 12-year-old camera. While it delivers outstanding image quality, the price makes it more of a niche market product for dedicated photographers who prioritize image quality over anything else. In Korea, the RX1 is not super expensive. If you're living in South Korea, I would definitely recommend this camera. It is around $500 right now, and I got mine for $460 to be exact. 6 months ago, you could get an RX1 for around $400. So the RX1 is affordable here, but not so much anywhere else. I believe this is $1,000 on eBay, which is pricey for a 12-year-old camera with slow autofocus and the worst battery. Next thing I don't like is the slow start. I turn off and on this camera a lot to save the battery life, and I noticed that it is pretty slow to start, so that is not good for quick snaps. Next is the lens error. I never heard this from other reviewers on YouTube, but in Korea, this camera has a bad name for being a ticking time bomb. It has a specific lens error that can only be fixed at first by pressing the lens. I don't know. But sooner or later, the same lens error will not let you shoot photos, resulting in a camera that cannot be fixed unless you replace the lens. The lens error is called E:61:00. This is probably the only reason I will be selling this camera sooner than later, even though I do love it. I heard that this lens error occurs more on the RX1 and RX1R, and much less on the RX1R Mark II. So maybe one day I will get the Mark II if I miss this one after selling it away. Next thing I don't like is that it doesn't have a flip screen. This is a real bummer, to be honest. I almost only shoot from the hip if I do have a flip screen. First, to be discreet, but also to have a different perspective, because I think a photo taken at eye level is the least interesting perspective. And lastly, I noticed that it has a weird lag when shooting in burst. I noticed that when I press down on the shutter, it doesn't always come through with the burst shooting. It stops burst shooting after 3 to 7 shots. It's random. When I'm shooting a person that is reflected on the mirror, it takes a couple of shots, but after the person walks away, it doesn't take shots anymore, but it comes and goes. It is what it is. The burst shooting is unreliable, but it might be just my camera. So this is it for the pros and cons of Sony RX1. And now I want to get into some information for you on whether to get the RX1 or the RX1R Mark II based on their differences and similarities. First thing to consider is the price difference. In Korea, Mark I is $460, while the Mark II is $1,600, more than 3 times more expensive. Next thing to consider is the megapixels. The Mark I has 24 megapixels, while the Mark II has 42 megapixels. So you do get to crop in more. But honestly, I never looked at my 24 megapixel files and thought that I needed more. But who knows, upon getting the Mark II, I might notice the croppability a lot more. Next is the flip screen. This is a huge one for me. I don't get to shoot from the hip with accuracy with the Mark I, but with the Mark II, I will be able to because Mark II comes with a flip screen. And next is the pop-up EVF. To a lot of people, this is a deal maker and breaker. The RX1 and RX1R does not come with a pop-up EVF, it comes up with a pop-up flash. For the Mark II, instead of the flash, it comes with an EVF, so that is something to consider. Next is the lens error. The RX1 and RX1R is known to have some issues with the lens. In Korea, they have a reputation for being a ticking time bomb, as I said before. But of course, your mileage may vary. There are still lots of RX1 in the market today and they are all in working condition. And they are almost 13 years old now, so take it with a grain of salt. It is not a guarantee that the lens will fail, but there are some reports about it. They say the Mark II is much less prone to this problem. Next thing to consider is the lens. They share the same lens, so in terms of image quality, you're looking at very similar sharpness, color rendition, and texture. And then there's the autofocus. It is reported to be much faster on the Mark II. On the RX1, I can confirm that the autofocus is a bit lacking, especially at night but sometimes even in daytime. But I am spoiled from using the A7R3 as my main camera and using snap focus on the Ricoh GR3X. Some people feel that it is a worthy upgrade from the Mark I to Mark II just for the autofocus. So to sum up, do I recommend this camera? For $500 in South Korea, yes, absolutely. There is no better camera you can buy for that price. And for people who are keen on niche market cameras who are located overseas and have to pay $1,000 for this camera, I still recommend it. With the crazy used camera prices these days, it will be hard to get a camera for $1,000 that will have better sharpness along with a full frame sensor. Yes, it is a bit older and there's a bit of a risk that comes with an older camera. But as I said before, there are a lot of these cameras on the market in perfect working condition, so I don't think you need to worry too much about that. I just love the sharpness, compactness, the design, and the silent shutter. But if I have to pay over $1,000 for this camera, I would advise against it because of the battery life and the slow autofocus. But if you're not a quick snap shooter, the slow autofocus will matter less, and you can put the tiny batteries in your pocket. After all the cons that I have listed, I am still dreaming about the RX1R Mark II, so that goes to show you how much I really like this camera. I think it is a worthy option for people who are on the market for the Leica Q series and the Fujifilm X100 series. It is a cheaper option than the Leica Q series, and it is also considerably smaller. And it has full frame sensor compared to the APS-C sensor of X100 series. So there's definitely a market for this camera. For your information, in Korea, the Fujifilm X100T and X100S goes for similar prices as the Sony RX1. So that wraps it up. I hope this helped you on your decision on the Sony RX1. If it did, please like and subscribe to my channel because it really helps out small channels like mine by pushing my content out to more viewers. And please leave me a comment on your experience with this camera. Do you adore it? I can't imagine anyone not being happy with this camera. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.